Do you know where to shop for good quality clothing? Do you know where to shop for good quality clothing for less than $200? A few weeks ago, The Cut published an article titled, "Why Does a Simple Summer Dress Cost So Much Now?" As part of the article, the author was searching for a simple summer dress, a task that should ordinarily be easy to do. However, she soon realized that she really only had two choices. One, a very poorly made, cheap dress, or two, a dress priced well over $500. I have to admit, I love to shop. However, even I am frustrated by what I am seeing in stores today. A floral dress for 500 or 700 euros, a cotton t-shirt for 200 euros, a simple silk shirt for 300 euros, or a pair of wedges for 400 euros. Good grief. Is any of this worth it? I often find myself asking. And I find myself wondering, am I even investing in good quality pieces? How do you know if the clothing that you're buying is of good quality and that you're investing in quality pieces? Well, in today's video, I'm going to share with you what I've learned on my journey of investing in better quality clothing so that you might be able to have a better sense of how to tell the difference between good quality and bad quality clothing. My name is Adriel. I'm an American who lives in Paris. Let's get into it. Have you seen those TikTok videos done by Eliza? Basically, they ask people to rank similar items from most expensive to least expensive. Basically, the items are all something quite similar, such as a floral dress. Each of the items comes from a different brand and is thus at a different price point. And invariably, the very first thing that people do is they ask to touch the item. Then, they proceed to rank all of the items in the wrong order, ranking the least expensive item as the most expensive and the most expensive item as the least expensive. Now, I don't get this example because I'm trying to say that an item with a higher price point is of better quality. No, most certainly actually don't agree with that at all. Instead, I tell you this to say that one of the first steps in learning to tell the difference between good quality clothing and bad quality clothing is to not trust your senses. 9 times out of 10, your senses are going to lie to you. Particularly, your sense of touch is going to cause you to think that something that is less expensive is actually a higher quality item than it is. Now, I'm going to give you an imperfect comparison as an example, but bear with me here. Let's take my Max Mara teddy coat and compare it to my Aperis faux fur coat. If you base it solely on touch, the Aperis faux fur coat is so incredibly soft. You would assume that it is the more expensive of the two pieces. But if you closely inspect the two coats, you'll see that when it all comes down to it, the Max Mara teddy coat is clearly superior as far as stitching, lining, etc. Now, this does not mean that my Aperis faux fur coat is bad quality. No. In fact, it's an exceptional quality coat, and if you're looking for a faux fur coat, I would 100% recommend this brand. I'm just saying that my Aperis faux fur coat is just simply not at the same level as my 3,000 euro Max Mara coat. So, if your senses are lying to you, how then do you know the difference between good quality clothing and bad quality clothing? Well, you have to pay close attention to the materials, stitching, and finishing. I could do a whole video on materials alone and fabrics, but I won't get into that here. I won't do that. I'm instead going to really keep this brief. Personally, I have found that natural materials always last longer than synthetic materials or plastic materials. So think cotton, linen, silk, cashmere, wool, versus acrylic, polyester, nylon. When I was at Amsterdam last year, I ended up going to a museum that's dedicated to the environmental impact of fashion. And it was incredibly eye-opening. I learned that even natural materials use a substantial amount of natural resources, such as water, when creating a garment. However, it's much easier to reuse and recycle those natural garments into new garments. Way easier than, for example, with synthetic materials. Synthetic materials use substantially less water than maybe natural materials to create. However, they use astronomically more energy, and they substantially pollute the environment with microplastics. They are almost impossible to reuse and recycle, unlike what fashion brands might want to tell you, and generally they just end up in landfills in third world countries. As a result, I strongly urge you to consider investing in more natural garments, more garments made of natural materials than garments made of synthetic materials. And that's personally one of the first steps that I've done as far as investing in better quality clothing. The thing is, yes, some items, no matter what you do, are always going to be made of plastics, such as tulle or velvet, but I highly doubt that anybody has a 50% wardrobe of tulle and velvet. And if you do, of course, no shame in that game, honey, but I am a little bit curious as to what that looks like. The next step in learning the difference between good quality and bad quality clothing is to look at the stitching. You can really easily spot imperfections or poor quality clothing almost immediately by the stitching. Part of the reason brands can get away with selling us these lower quality clothing is because we don't know what a good quality hem is. We have no idea what a hem should look like. So for example, our grandparents used to make their own clothing, or they used to have their clothing custom made. They knew what a hem looked like. My mom, she used to make our clothing as kids. She knew different stitches of hems and what a good quality hem was and what wasn't. As a result, we need to know that. Do you know what a good quality hem looks like? If not, go to a fabric store and get a book, honey. Learn exactly what a good quality hem looks like. Learn the different ways of stitching a hem. If there are loose threads already in the hem, that item is a no-go. It's poor quality. Take a look at raw edges. Generally, they are going to rip. So if you see a raw edged hem, look at it. Is it going to continue to rip up the garment? If so, you don't want that. That's going to be a poor quality garment. Also, take a close look at the seams of the garment. How do the seams look? Are they done neatly? Are they finished? Are there any loose threads? Does it look like it's going to rip in a few years? Frankly, you can give it a little tug, just very gently, and you can see whether or not the seam is good quality and whether or not the garment is going to rip. Even if you're not shopping fast fashion, you want to closely inspect your clothing because you can't just assume that it's going to be finished properly. So during the solds, I saw quite a few Zimmermann pieces that I absolutely loved, and I really wanted to splurge on them. However, I simply couldn't justify the purchase. So first and foremost, several of the pieces that I saw that I really loved actually were made with tulle. And so that was kind of a hurdle because how much tulle, how much plastic do you really need in your wardrobe? But then, as I inspected the item even closer, I was incredibly disappointed by the stitching and the seams. A lot of the stitching and the seams, they just weren't well done. And I really thought that after a few years, the garment would just completely fall apart. There were loose threads, etc. I simply couldn't justify the dress, even at 70% off. And I was really disappointed because Zimmermann is supposed to be a luxury brand. However, the Zimmermann corset that I ultimately ended up buying, perfection. It's incredibly well made, it's impeccable, the finishing is beautiful. It was worth the splurge, even though it was only 40% off. Now, let's talk about finishing. I just mentioned how the finishing on my Zimmermann corset is absolutely impeccable, and that really drove part of the reason why I bought it. What exactly do I mean though by finishing? Well, another way to quickly be able to gauge whether your clothing is good quality versus bad quality is based upon how it is finished. So in other words, little details such as buttons, zippers, hardware, etc. These are the little details that you definitely don't want to ignore. Now, you remember my Burberry trench coat video where I compared my 2017 trench coat to my 2024 trench coat? A lot of you all said, you know, you can't compare a Burberry Brit trench coat to a traditional one, etc. Believe me, I know that Burberry Brit is a completely different line. However, one of the things I noted repeatedly in that video was how I didn't like the stitching around the buttonholes. Now, this stitching may last until the end of the time. However, but to me, when I look at it, it looks cheap. It does not look very good quality. It doesn't look like it was very well done. And so it's for that reason that I have a problem with the quality of the coat. It's because in part those itty bitty little details, to me, are a little bit lacking in the coat. I want the hardware in my garments to exude quality. Now, this doesn't mean that the garment has to be incredibly expensive, but I know for a fact that I want it to at least look expensive. I want the buttons to feel substantial. I want the zippers to feel weighty. Nothing drives me more crazy than when you buy a designer item and they slap a cheap zipper on it or some cheap buttons. Like, if the dress is made with superior materials, invest in a superior quality zipper. Now, I also pay very close attention to the lining that is used in a garment, and also whether or not there even should be lining, and also how much lining is used. So frankly, my opinion is that winter wool pants should always be lined, mainly for warmth. I believe that suit pants, like suiting for going to work, that those pants should always be lined. When they're not, for me, it's a signal that the product, frankly, is not well made. Now, I know that some people will disagree with me on that, and that's perfectly fine. But my view is that when you don't have lining, or when a brand uses cheap lining on a garment, it's one of the ways that you can tell that it's not going to be a very well-made garment. Again, you'll want to look very closely at the stitching to see if there are any loose threads. Just a little tug, and it should be pretty easy to tell if the lining is going to rip. I had a dress that I actually bought from H&M when I first started working, and I used and wore that dress for 10 years. And when I left the US, I gave it to someone else to use and was like, be well dressed. That dress, I never had any issues with lining in it. I had no issues with seams, nothing. The dress was well made. It wasn't expensive, but it was well made. The lining was appropriate, the lining was beautiful, and it stood the test of time. And as such, to me, it was a good quality piece of clothing. Now, one thing I really want to note though is that there is often this intersection between the material of clothing and the lining, and I really want to talk about that because that's another place where I would say you can really tell whether or not something is good quality versus bad quality. Last year, I spent months searching for a nice quality pair of white linen pants, and there was one issue that I kept overwhelmingly encountering. None of these white linen pants were lined. Now, normally that shouldn't be an issue because if you're buying a nice pair of linen pants, they don't need to be lined because the linen won't be see-through. However, I soon realized that outside of the ultra luxury market, overwhelmingly, brands were using cheap, thin linen. And as a result, the pants needed to be lined. See, this is where you're going to see the intersection of material and lining. Because sometimes what brands will do is they will use lining to cover up the fact that they're using a cheaper material, okay? And sometimes brands will use a cheaper material, but then not line, and that garment needs to be lined because they've used a cheaper material. Kind of getting that? So, if you're buying a high quality linen pant, and it is a good quality linen pant, and it's made with good quality linen, those pants are probably not going to be lined because it's not going to be see-through. And so as a result, you're not going to need that lining. However, if the brand is not using high quality linen, if they're using cheap linen, then the pants are always going to have to be lined. This is why, even if you're looking at a natural fabric, if you try it on the dressing room, you gotta leave the dressing room and go stand next to a window and take a photo. If you find that you can see through that silk skirt or those linen pants, then basically that means that they're not using high quality silk or high quality linen, and as a result, it may not be worth your money. And you may be getting a garment that's not of particularly great quality, even if you're buying a garment that's made of natural materials. Last but not least, when it comes to finishing, you're going to want to keep in mind whether or not it looks like the brand did anything to kind of cut corners in order to reduce the cost. So, for example, take pockets. Are there real pockets or are there fake pockets? Fake pockets are something that is often done in order to cut costs because it takes time, it takes fabric to create a proper pocket. So as a result, a lot of times you'll see brands, what's one of the things they'll do? They'll put in a fake pocket and that's all you'll have. Another thing you're going to want to ask yourself is, if there isn't a pocket, should there be a pocket? So for example, a lot of times in women's blazers, you don't have an interior pocket, but an interior pocket is standard on any high quality woman's blazer. So as a result, is the blazer you're about to buy, does it not have a pocket? If it doesn't, then it was something that was done to cut the cost of production, and as a result, it's probably a lower quality garment. On the other hand though, if there is an interior pocket, you're going to want to look at how it was finished. Is there a little ribbon of fabric that matches the garment color? Is there a little flap that will keep, that goes over the top of the pocket and it has a little button? Is the pocket weighty or substantial enough to hold a phone? Is the pocket, does the pocket look like, does it have any loose seams? What does the lining of the pocket even look like? How is that stitched within it? These are just the little details that are going to be present in a quality garment that you're just not going to see in a lower quality garment. So that's why you have to pay close attention to things like pockets, because pockets are one of the places where you often see brands cut corners in order to save cost in production. Higher quality garments, note I say higher quality, not higher price garments, will nearly always have the little extras that set it apart. That may be in how it is stitched and just the little details added to the garment, or simply just in the materials used. So always make sure to look for these things, look closely at finishing when you are shopping for your clothing. Now let's go back to those Eliza videos. I am almost always able to rank the least expensive to the most expensive outfit on the very first try. Now, how is it that I'm able to do that even though I can't closely inspect the items? Well, it's pretty simple. I look at the hems of the skirts and the dresses. I look at the clasp and the buttons on purses and outerwear. A skirt that the hem is not properly done, it's not a pretty hem, it's not well done, that skirt or dress, the hem isn't going to fall properly. It's pretty easy to spot cheap buttons and cheap clasps on purses and outerwear. Now, I say all this to say that there are plenty of times when you will also find cheap buttons and cheap clasps on expensive items. And this is why it's so important, at least in my opinion, to not just shop with or for a particular brand. There are always people in my DMs and my comments asking me, where do you shop? I'm going to be frank, I shop everywhere. I am not particularly loyal to a particular brand. I am loyal to quality, and that's what keeps me coming back, and that's what keeps me shopping at different places. I would rather save my money and buy one high quality thing than spend my money and have 5 lower quality items. And this is not always, I think, an easy thing to do, particularly in our culture, which is very much buy, spend more, buy. However, I personally found that if we slow down, take a moment, and just really learn about materials, stitching, and finishing, that we'll soon find that we are better investing our money in better quality clothing because we know what it is we're supposed to be looking for. So, with that said, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to continuing the discussion more in the comments. Take care, stay safe, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!